Welcome in to episode 65 of the No Huddle Show. I'm Matt Lombardo along with Elliot Shore-Parks. Joe Giglio not with us this week. Be sure to check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. You can also follow the show on Twitter at the No Huddle Show. Elliot, big week. We're now just 9 days away from the NFL draft in Philadelphia. And if you check out the Ben Franklin Parkway and the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, you're seeing the preparations well underway. Your thoughts as we look ahead and preview some of the defensive prospects in this draft? I know that you and I have gone back and forth on various platforms, whether it's the site, whether it's Twitter, whether it's the show, about what the Eagles should do at 14. But I think we're both in agreement that throughout this draft, at some point along the way, they need to address the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and the question is, when you get to 14, the way the Eagles needs and the way the roster's set up is they're really going to have to make a decision. And it could work out, to work in their favor, but between best player available and between need, because the needs on this roster are so glaring right now. They really need cornerback help. They probably need a defense and an additional defensive end. And then obviously on the offensive side of the ball, you're talking about a running back, and I still think they need another receiver. So at 14, maybe they take best player available, but on the last week we talked about the offensive side of the ball where they have needs. I mean, this team has needs everywhere, as Jeffrey Lurie said. But now that we're talking about the defensive side of the ball, you're talking about, maybe two cornerbacks with their first 4 picks. They have those 2 fourth-round picks. You're going to need to add a linebacker. You definitely need to add a defensive end. And one position that, doesn't get talked about a lot, but is a safety. I mean, they were open to trading Malcolm Jenkins in that deal for Brandon Cooks. They had Jamal Adams in the top safety in the draft. They used one of their 30 pre-draft visits on him. So clearly there's some interest there. So I wouldn't rule out them taking a safety at some point, and maybe even, before the 5th round. So clearly a lot, there's going to be a lot. I would guess of their 8 picks that they have, it wouldn't surprise me, if 5 of them are on the defensive side of the ball.
I absolutely agree. And I've kind of coveted this and tweeted about it and written about it on the show that I think that it's high time, given the state of the Eagles cornerback position and just how valuable it is in Jim Schwartz's defense, that this is about the time you replicate the draft strategy of the year where you took Lito Shepherd, Sheldon Brown, and Michael Lewis, 3 secondary players in your first 4 picks. And I tweeted about this morning at Matt Lombardo PHL and, of course, Elliot Shore-Parks on Twitter at Elliot Shore-Parks. But, Elliot, there are about 6 or 7 players that I would take over a cornerback at 14. That's Alabama linebacker Reuben Foster, LSU running back Leonard Fournette, Stanford running back Christian McCaffrey, Western Michigan wide receiver Corey Davis, Jamal Adams, the safety out of LSU that you spoke about, who I think is very much on their radar, Solomon Thomas, the defensive end out of Stanford, and, of course, Mike Williams out of Clemson. But I think that when you look at the cornerbacks that are kind of graded out in round 1, and you'd start to think about guys like Marshawn Lattimore out of Ohio State, Garyon Connolly, his Buckeye teammate out of Ohio State, who now some are saying could go as high as the top 10. I also like Marlon Humphrey out of Alabama a lot, Tre'Davious White out of LSU. They're going to have a handful of corners that are in that range at number 14, but I agree with you that when you build your board and when you go on the clock at number 14, the Eagles would be very wise to focus on taking the best player available based on talent, but I think they're fortunate enough this time around, and whether it's offense or defense, Elliot, I think that there is going to be an immediate impact player who fills at least one of their needs when they go on the clock.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think we both agree that if cornerback isn't the top need on the team, it's probably top 2. Whether you can debate running back or cornerback, but cornerback's definitely up there. But the thing is, if you want to strictly talk about their 2017 roster and what this team needs to compete, in 2016, you can make the argument Nolan Carroll and Leotis McKelvin, where if they weren't the worst set of starting cornerbacks in the league, they were probably up there. They were both very bad. McKelvin throughout the year. Nolan Carroll started off okay, but really tailed off. So it's not like the Eagles won 7 games last year behind a secondary that featured Richard Sherman and Patrick Peterson. They got really bad cornerback play last year, still won 7 games. And not only that, still had the 13th, I think it was actually the 17th or 13th best passing defense in the NFL. So their secondary, despite, the really bad cornerback play, was one of the better pass defenses in the NFL. Maybe that has to do with the pass rush, but the pass rush in theory shouldn't be worse. It should be better than it was last year, because Timmy Jernigan's an upgrade, in my opinion, as a pass rusher over Benny Logan. I think Chris Long's an upgrade as a pass rusher over Connor Barwin. So the pass rush is going to be better. The safeties are going to be the same. So if you just look strictly at the cornerback position, they need to add one for the future. And I agree. Obviously you would love a Sheldon Brown, Lito, Shepard draft. That's a lot easier said than done, though. It's going to be hard to find those players of that caliber early on. But I mean, if you look at their cornerbacks for next year, they're going to have Jalen Mills, who I think can probably give you what Nolan Carroll did. I would say, based off what you got off Nolan Carroll last year, I think he's going to be better than Nolan Carroll was last year. But let's say Nolan Carroll and Jalen Mills is a wash. At this point, you're really looking only for a cornerback that can be an upgrade over Leotis McKelvin. And I mean, honestly, me or you could probably do that, or Joe's new baby. I mean, like he was that bad. So if you strictly talk about, yes, they need better cornerbacks. I agree that the cupboard is pretty bare there in terms of prospects for the future. But I do think I don't think they absolutely have to come out of the first two rounds with an impact corner, because they got really bad cornerback play last year. And I think that's why there's an argument to be made for, if you sit there at 14, you don't like some of the quarterbacks. Let's say Lattimore and Humphrey are off the board. Conley at this point looks like he could be. I think that's a reach to have him, but I agree with you that I think he could be off the board. You're sitting there. I mean, if those three players are gone, you're looking at Tre'Davious White, who I like, but I'm not super huge on. I mean, I think there's a situation where you could be at 14 and the best player is not going to be a cornerback. And you could ask yourself, do you trade back at that point, or do you just address, maybe the running back position? Reuben Foster, to me, I like him, but that shoulder injury to me is concerning. I mean, as a linebacker, obviously shoulder is important in all aspects of football, but especially as a linebacker, when you're a physical player that's going to be going between those gaps to meet running backs, you need to have a strong shoulder. And the fact that he might need rotator cuff surgery, to me, is a little bit concerning. So I don't even know if I would take Reuben Foster over, a receiver if John Ross is there, Mike Williams, Dalvin Cook. We had our debate last week about Christian McCaffrey and whether he's worth the 14th overall pick. But, I just think, yes, they need a cornerback. I agree with that. And they probably need two. But I don't think it's to the point where fans make it out where they're not even going to be a competing team next year if they don't add a cornerback early on.
I think that there's an argument to be made that there could be a scenario playing out on Thursday night where you see these quarterbacks, and we see it every year, whether it's last year with Jared Goff and Wentz and Prescott going later. That's just another element to teams getting desperate for quarterback help. You look at teams at the top of the board like the Jets and the Browns, and a team like the Texans further back. There's a chance that these quarterbacks could go higher than a lot of us anticipated a month ago, right? Which would be an ideal scenario for the Eagles. And let me ask you this, Elliot, because in my opinion, that if, let's say, the Jets wind up taking a quarterback at number 6, and let's say that whether it's Trubisky, whether it's Kaiser, whether it's Watson, the Browns wind up taking quarterback at number 12. If the Eagles get a phone call from the Houston Texans at 25, which I think is entirely realistic if the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks are gone, given how much Bill O'Brien seems to really be falling in love with Pat Mahomes, if the Eagles get the phone call and you're sitting there at 14 and McCaffrey's gone and Fournette is gone, and let's just say for the sake of argument, John Ross is gone and Conley is gone, and the best players available are Lattimore, the best player at linebacker, Reuben Foster. Well, if Conley goes first, let's say that these quarterbacks push these guys down the board.
You're saying if Marshawn Lattimore is available to me at 14.
Correct. And you get a phone call, whether it's Derek Barnett, whether it's Lattimore, whether it's Foster, one of those 3 is there. Do you take the deal or do you take the player? In my opinion, I take Lattimore because he's the number 1 or number 2 cornerback.
Yeah,
I don't think it's realistic that he's there, but my point is that if these quarterbacks go off the board, if these running backs go off the board, that's going to push some impact players, especially on defense, further down closer to the Eagles. And I think they'd have a difficult decision to make if that offer includes a second-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, ESPN yesterday, and we're recording this on a Tuesday, so it was a Monday where they wrote the article, just kind of did not trades that are based in any reporting, just kind of rough trades on what might make sense for different teams. And they had the Houston Texans trading up with the Eagles at number 14, Eagles going back to number 25, and then adding, I think it was the 53rd overall pick in the draft. So, at this point, you're the Eagles and you're drafting 25, 43, and 53. I would definitely do that because, obviously if Marshawn Lattimore is on the board, which I think we both agree is probably not going to happen, then yes, I would take Marshawn Lattimore because he's viewed as the top cornerback in the draft at your biggest position. But If Reuben Foster's there, I mean, like I just, explained why I have some
Sure.
concerns about him. I know that the Eagles like Kevin King. So, I've given them Kevin King at 14 in a lot of mock drafts. I wouldn't take Kevin King at 14. I mean, I can see the reason why they like him. Played all five secondary spots, 6'3", long arms, great athlete. Was productive as a college player. So I think, look, Kevin King got invited to the first round of the draft, and 9 out of 10 times, if you get invited to the first round of the draft, you're going in the first round. Very few players, or at least maybe one player a year, end up sitting in that green room for round two. So clearly, the rest of the NFL also views Kevin King as a potential first round pick. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm sitting there at 14, and I can fall back to 25, I absolutely do it, because in the second round, and the result of the quarterbacks going early and the result of the cornerback class being so deep, I think you can get a lot of impact players in the second round. I know everyone soured on Tease Tabor out of Florida because of his 40 time, but I would definitely take him with the 53rd overall pick if he was there. Sidney Jones out of Washington, you can debate if that's too early. Obviously, the Achilles injury is maybe the most devastating injury he could have suffered.
And that's where, if you make that deal to get the second round pick, you could potentially
Yeah, you could
draft a
take
player who
right.
could start, and then you take him and you hope that he's healthy by October or November, or worst case scenario, you stash him for next year.
Right, and also, I mean, obviously you want to be picking higher in the draft because you have a better chance at the better prospects. But, I don't think the player, if it plays out the way we kind of think it will, I don't think the player they're going to get at 14 is going to be a considerably better prospect than the one at 15. I mean, if you even look at the board in general, Myles Garrett obviously is viewed as the top prospect pretty unanimously. Leonard Fournette's viewed basically as the best running back by a lot of people. But after that, I mean, and then Lattimore, I guess. But there's really only three prospects that I would say are viewed head and shoulders with everybody else. After that, even from picks number 4 to 15, I mean, I think you could really interchange those guys pretty easily. So yeah, I would like to pick at 14, but if I think I can get Kevin King at 25, or Dalvin Cook or something like that, I would absolutely drop back and add that second round pick.
Elliot, let me ask you this. If you're looking at the Eagles defense, and we're looking at cornerback, we're looking at linebacker, looking at defensive linemen, how would you rank those positions in terms of the Eagles' need, and who's your favorite prospect at those three spots? I'll ask you yours, and then I'll give you mine.
All right, so I was going to say, you said cornerback, defensive line, and what was the third one?
Linebacker.
Linebacker. Okay. Well, cornerback, I mean, if we're just talking all the players in the draft, I guess we would have to say Marshawn Lattimore. Our colleague Mark Eckel talked to scouts, and you can read it on NJ.com, and it's pretty clear he's viewed as the best cornerback in this draft. Now, I would say personally, if we're just talking my opinion, I'm not very big on Garyon Conley. Tre'Davious White, a lot of things I hear about him is, well, he can help you on special teams too, but I don't want my number one cornerback playing special teams for me.
Sure.
Ideally, if worst case scenario, I need to put him back there, that'd be great. But if he's going to be my number one cornerback, I'm not putting him out there for punt return. I like Tease Tabor. I know it's not an option at 14, but yeah, I know he ran a 4.7, but he was arguably top 2 cover corner in college football last year. I forget the exact numbers, but he basically last year when he was targeted, he gave up a passer rating of, I actually have it right here. He gave up a passer rating of 41.2 over the past 3 years on throws in his direction. If the quarterback would have just thrown the ball in the dirt every play, that's a quarterback rating of 39.6. So, you had basically as good of a chance of completing a pass at Tease Tabor as you did if you threw the ball on the ground directly. So he can cover, and I understand that he had a slow 40 time, but he can cover. And so I would absolutely take him at number 43 overall if he's still on the board if I were the Eagles. I know he's not option at 14. I'm not saying he's the best cornerback in the draft, but he is a guy I really like at that position.
At cornerback, I disagree with you a little bit about Garyon Conley, and as somebody who watches a lot of Big Ten football, Penn State season ticket holder, all that, I've watched a lot of him over the last couple of years, and what I really like about Conley is he's really good in press coverage at the line of scrimmage. He's also really good at playing zone coverage, and we know the Eagles like to play a lot of 2-deep zone under Jim Schwartz, so I think he's versatile enough in both of those areas. He can step in and start right away, but as is the case every year around this time, time, as we get closer and closer to the draft, you start to hear one or two names that are climbing up draft boards, and Conley is the guy that seems to be on the receiving end of that hype this week, and now people are saying that he could go as high as the top 10. So if they want Conley, they better go up and get him. Another guy that I also like, maybe as a round 2 prospect, is Chidobe Awuzie out of, I believe he went to Colorado. 6'1", 220 pounds, long arms, about 31-inch, wingspan. Guy who's aggressive, he's a ball hawk, good ball skills. If the Eagles are going shopping for a corner at number 43, or if they trade back with the Texans, you're picking at 55 and Awuzie is on the board, I think he'd be a really nice fit in this scheme.
My only issue with Conley is, and he was phenomenal last year, I agree with you on that. The 2 seasons prior to that, passer rating 71.6 in 2015, 129.2 in 2014. And obviously these are kids, they're improving, so
Yep.
You're not going to hold that against him too much. But he's not a great tackler, so I would just be a little concerned about the fact he's a one-year wonder. I mean, I'm not saying I think he should fall out of the first round. I would just be a little concerned. And this kind of goes, well, let's go position by position, actually, before we
Sure.
get lost into that. What was you wanted to do defensive line?
Defensive line and linebacker.
Defensive line. All right. Well, if we're talking strictly edge rushers and not so much defensive tackles, when we're talking realistic pick for the Eagles, Derek Barnett at 14, a guy that they seem like they like. They've brought him in for a visit. Makes sense there. I think he's kind of viewed in the 12 to 17 range. Productive player in college. I mean, he was probably one of the best pass rushers there. Pro Football Focus had him as the second overall edge rushers among all, edge rushers in college football. So he obviously was very good. A guy I like is Jordan Willis out of
That's my
Kansas.
guy.
Yep, out of Kansas State. Yeah. I think he's looked at it, I don't know if he'll be there at 43 when the Eagles go, but to me, if you're going to take a defensive end in the first round, and I shouldn't say I'm against it, but I wouldn't take a defensive end in the first round if I was the Eagles, because I think you can get a guy like Jordan Willis probably at 43. I think he was a better pass rusher than Derek Barnett in college. And last year, what Jordan Willis did a great job of last year is finishing plays. You'll get the Eagles pass rushers. We'd probably both agree Brandon Graham is their best pass rusher.
Yep.
Only had 5.5 sacks last year. Got a lot of pressures. Pressures are important. I agree with you on that. But the Eagles as a whole, it feels like over the past few years, have had trouble just finishing the play when they get to the quarterback. And Jordan Willis last year, I think he sacked a quarterback at a larger percentage of pressure plays than Myles Garrett and Derek Barnett. So Jordan Willis, when he gets there, finishes the play, and that's something I want out of my defensive end. There's a lot of talk about Charles Harris kind of going up the board from Missouri. I wouldn't take him at 14. I would take, the best available running back or receiver probably at that point over Harris. But what do you think about their need for a defensive end? I mean, you think it's something they have to address in the first round or first 2 picks?
Yeah, I think, Elliot, that it's one of their biggest needs along with corner on defense. And I go back to the same philosophy of if you're going to focus on defense, you need to come away with a defensive end sometime in the first 2 days or so. I don't think you need to worry about storming the gates to go and get a defensive end like you did when you traded up to get Fletcher Cox back in the day, because you needed that run stuffing, get after the passer defensive tackle in a 4-3. But with Willis, I think the Eagles like him. I know that they sent their defensive line coach to go down and work him out at the pro day. They spent time with him during the combine. And you look at his numbers a year ago, 17.5 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, 25.5 sacks in his 4-year career, 3 of those years as a starter. I think that the fact that the Eagles have shown this much interest, and the fact that you look at some of the other names that we've talked about on both sides of the ball, if those guys are gone by the time they go on the clock, I think that if they're trading back to target Jordan Willis, because I don't know that I'm as confident as you are that he's going to be there at 43. Mm-hmm. If you want him, I think you're going to need to get him in that mid to late first round range. So maybe it's one of those cases where you take a player at 14 and you trade back into the first round to get Jordan Willis, or you trade back from 14 and take him at 25, at 22, wherever you move back to. But I think that if we're ranking the hierarchy of need on defense, it goes cornerback 1, edge rusher 2, cornerback 3, linebacker 4.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I mean, one of the reasons is all the Eagles pass rushers are over 28 years old. If you
Yep.
just look at Graham, Curry, and Chris Long, and Curry, it feels like he's still a rookie, but he'll be 29 on June 30th. So he's definitely, I mean, this I think is gonna be what his fourth or fifth season. He doesn't play a ton, so it's not like he has a ton of wear and tear on his body. But yeah, I mean, Chris Long is 32 or at least over 30. I think he's gonna be a better pass rusher than Connor Barwin. But the issue to me isn't so much. Yeah, obviously you always want to add defensive, pass rushers to the team. If you look at the way Howie Roseman spends the money on this roster, defensive line and offensive line are 1 and 2 in terms of where they have the most money committed. So it's clear they want to build from the inside out. And if you're doing that, you're going to need youth. I just don't think at 14 the best player is going to be a defensive end, and I think it would be a reach there to take a Charles Harris. Or, I mean, Barnett's not really a reach, but I think the Eagles need to, with that 14th overall pick, if you want to go to the second round, third round, both their fourths, I agree there, you look more down the road. But at 14, the Eagles need to add an impact player that's going to make a difference for them next year. Obviously, last year Carson Wentz clearly had a big impact. He played, a ton, obviously. But the year before that, Nelson Aguilar didn't have a big impact right away. Marcus Smith, Marcus Smith and Nelson Aguilar have never had any type of impact. But, Lane Johnson the year before that, yes, he did play well. But if you just look at the history of the Eagles' first-round picks, they very rarely have had a player come in and right away make an instant impact. And I don't think this team is as far away from being a playoff team as other people think. So if at 14, for as much as we've debated back and forth Christian McCaffrey, you at least know he'll come in here next year and play a lot. He'll be involved in the offense. That's one of the reasons I like Dalvin Cook a lot. I think he'll come in and completely change the offense in a lot of ways. They need a player that's going to come in and change things for this team. And I'm just not sure that at defensive end, whether it's Barnett, Jordan Willis at 25, I'm just not sure they're going to give you the type of impact you need out of your first round pick right out the gate.
See, I look at this, it's not just short-term need, it's also long-term need. And I think what the Eagles did this offseason was, we can both agree, the priority number one was bolster the talent around Carson Wentz. Mission accomplished, at least in the short term. Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Chance Warmack. You've added to the talent, and with Warmack, the depth on offense at some key positions. Defensively, I think they went the Band-Aid route. Timmy Jernigan, while he might be here in the long run, it's going to be expensive, but in the short term, he's a guy that I agree with you is at least in terms of rushing the passer an upgrade over Benny Logan. You look at Chris Long, a better scheme fit than someone like Connor Barwin, but again, just a defensive and rotational player, not a starter, not a long-term solution. And I think that when we look at Schwartz's defense, it's predicated on two things: strong cornerback play, but maybe even more importantly, getting to the quarterback with your front four. And whether that's Barnett, whether that's Willis, whether that's somebody like Taco Charlton in round 2, whether it's another defensive end in round 3, I think they need to come away with an impact player, as you said, but I think that they would prefer to have that impact player be a corner or be a defensive end, because those are the two phases of the defense that have the biggest impact, at least in this scheme.
Yeah, I think those are definitely fair points to make. What was a position you want to do next so we can make sure we get to it? Linebacker. Okay, well, why don't you start first? Who do you like the best at linebacker for this team? And I mean, how early would you address this need?
Well, I think that Reuben Foster, I have the same concerns you do about the shoulder injury, but part of me is believing that maybe this is just one of those medical ruses that pop up every year, and teams start to spread rumors about certain players because they hope that they'll fall down the board. And who knows if this isn't the Eagles putting that out there to try and get Foster's draft stock to tumble just a bit. So if Foster's sitting there at 14, he's one of my 7 players that I would take above a cornerback. Outside of Foster, I don't know that this is necessarily the deepest linebacker class in the history of the world. I know they like his teammate, Adams, I believe his name is, out of Alabama, who came in for a visit.
Ryan Anderson.
Ryan Anderson. Right. I know that he came in for a visit. I would like him in round 2 or round 3, but outside of that, I don't know how many, outside of maybe a diamond in the rough, that a Jordan Hicks type player who they select, conceivably out of nowhere in the opinions of a lot of reporters and fans, I don't know that linebacker is necessarily all that deep in this class. So if you can come away with one of the 2 Alabama linebackers in the first 3 rounds, I think that's a success.
Yeah, and then the question too is, I mean, the Eagles have now begun their off-season training program. Michael Kendricks is reportedly, according to
He's
Jeff
there.
McClain at
Yep.
Inquirer, he's there. So, I think when we talk about needs on this team and we talk about the roster in general, it's always assumed Michael Kendricks isn't a part of that roster, that he's not going to be on the team, and I think that's uh, probably probably still a fair assumption, but he is in the building. I mean, these are voluntary. He doesn't have to be here. Considering that they've been trying to trade him for the past, year and a half at this point, I think it would be fair for him to not be too happy with the team. I mean, they made him inactive the last week, even though he was, pretty healthy. So the fact he's there, to me, I don't know. Maybe he is on this roster. And if Michael Kendricks is on the roster, then your need at linebacker is really not that great because you have Nigel Bradham, you have Jordan Hicks, you have Kendricks. The third linebacker doesn't play that much anyway. And then you have Joe Walker, who, out of Oregon, late round pick last year, but a guy they like. He's a middle linebacker, but,
They have really
maybe,
high hopes for him.
yeah, maybe you can slide Hicks over to the outside on some plays and play Joe Walker. So if Kendricks is on the roster, their need at linebacker isn't as big as it is if he's not. And even if he's not on the roster, the third linebacker last year played about a third of the defensive snaps, or I think a little less than that, and definitely less as the season went on. So I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't take Reuben Foster at 14 for the reasons I already said, but I think if you're adding a linebacker, you're looking at the third round, one of their two fourth round picks. I don't think it's going to be a big name guy people recognize.
I agree. Or you wait until 6 or 7, you take a kid like Brandon Bell out of Penn State, or you bring him in as an undrafted free agent.
Love those Penn State guys.
Love him. Leadership guy, special
Exactly,
teamer.
yep.
But it's not going but it's not going to be, if it's not Foster or Anderson, I think we're in agreement. It's not going to be one of those quote unquote high impact players right away at that
Right.
position.
Not a linebacker, no.
So when we look at this, Elliot, we've spent a lot of time, not only today, but in the last couple of weeks, talking about those top of the board type of players, or those 1 or round 2 prospects. But who are some of your favorite mid to late round, let's say, cornerbacks that if the Eagles do go offense on round 1 and potentially even in round 2 before they get to a cornerback, who are some of your favorite round 3 to round 6 type of prospects that might not have the name value of being at the top of the board, but could come in and be maybe not immediate impact players, but starting caliber players for this team?
Yeah, well, I already talked about Tabor, who at this point could potentially be a third round pick, but I think he's a guy you get out the first round that I really like. Akello Witherspoon out of Colorado, probably also, I don't know. I mean, he's going up boards, maybe mid second, definitely early third at the worst. He's a guy, good size again. I think he's 6'3". The Eagles had him in for a visit, so they obviously like him. If you just look at some of the cornerbacks the Eagles have brought in, DeMonte, I'm going to mispronounce his name. Kazi out of San Diego State, they brought him in. He's definitely a late round guy, or at least what do you think? Even probably second or third round.
Probably around 3 or 4, somewhere in there. He's a guy I really like, but the issue with him, along with Jordan Lewis out of Michigan, who's another guy that in the right scheme could have a nice prolonged NFL career.
Too, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Off the field issues with Lewis, but also the fact they're both under 6 feet. And I like Kazi. I like Lewis a little bit. Kazi, what I like about him is plays bigger than his size. He's a tackles for loss monster. You can put him up near the line of scrimmage in run support, which the Eagles like to do because they put that third linebacker on the bench in such a high percentage of plays, but he's under 6 foot. And if you and I know anything about the cornerback position with the Eagles, they like tall guys, they like long guys, they like guys with size, but they did invest a visit in Kazi, which I think is interesting given that he doesn't necessarily fit their profile. But another player I think that we need to keep an eye on is Quincy Wilson out of Florida. Yep. As much attention as Jalen Tabor gets, Wilson was a little bit more physical, and he's kind of in that Sheldon Brown type of a mold. And he also returned an interception or 2 for a touchdown last year, so you can see that he has the requisite ball skills to come in and have an impact.
And he's a guy, I mean, he also came to Philadelphia. I think he was in yesterday on Monday. So the Eagles have shown interest on him. One more guy before we move on, I'll say is, again, not tall, but Corn Elder out of Miami. Great tackler. He's maybe one of the best tacklers in the draft. So that's something the Eagles cornerback struggled with a ton last year. Leotis McKelvin and Nolan Carroll. So the Eagles are looking at a guy and maybe one of their 2 fourth-round picks. Corn Elder's a guy that they could look at for sure out of Miami.
Now, Elliot, I would be remiss if we didn't get through this podcast talking about the defensive prospects in this draft and the cornerback prospects in this draft if we didn't have a healthy conversation about Sidney Jones, because you and I have talked about this before, both, on the podcast, off the podcast. I have written about him. You've written about him. For a stretch there, coming out of the combine and approaching his pro day, it seemed like Sidney Jones at 6 foot 181, really good ball skills, really fluid hips, good footwork. It seemed like he had all of the trappings of being the prototypical cornerback in Jim Schwartz's scheme. Had good numbers in his career: 145 tackles, 8.5 for loss, 8 picks, returned one of them for a touchdown, 21 pass breakups, 10 pass breakups a year ago, 4 interceptions with 1 taken to the house last season alone. Seemed like he was a guy that would be high on the Eagles board, maybe even the best player available for them at 14, but then he goes out, tears his Achilles at the pro day, and now he's tumbling down boards. I think that he's somebody that could still go in round 2, and I think that the Eagles would be wise to somehow find a way to pick up that extra second-round pick to get him, because even if he's not ready until next year, that's like getting another second-round pick next season. If he's ready this year, it's a bonus. How far do you think that he falls, and how aggressive, if at all, do you think the Eagles should be about trying to get him?
I mean, so obviously I'm not a doctor. So clearly, I can't speak to his chances of being 100% again. But I will say the Achilles injury, if it was an ACL, I would be on board with you in terms of maybe taking him with another second-round pick. The Achilles injury is something where I think there's reason to be, if not legitimately concerned, have a healthy amount of concern about him not being the same player when he comes back. So if he, it's going to impact potentially his speed. The Achilles injury is really tough to come back from. So,
Sure.
Before the injury, he was viewed as a top of the first round pick, but we haven't seen what he looks like after this Achilles injury. I know, when he talks, and clearly, he's optimistic, as he should be. That should be how he should attack this rehab. But, he's saying,
and he has plenty of reason this time of year to talk the way he's been talking with all that optimism.
Right, exactly. So, is he actually going to be ready to play? I don't care if he plays next year. That's not my thing. My thing is he going to be the same player when he's healthy again? And I think there's fair reason to be concerned he might not be. So I don't know if I want to take a risk on a guy with a second-round pick. And even if you have another second-round pick, I'd rather take a guy that I know is healthy and not have to worry about the medical concern there. Look, if he's on the board in the 3rd round, maybe. I would definitely take him with one of the 2 fourth. I don't think he's going to be there. But I'm not completely against taking him. I just think that this team has enough holes to take a prospect where – this isn't a team like the Patriots are an extreme example, but the Patriots or the Seahawks or something like that where, you can take a chance on a guy late and hope it works out. I think the Eagles need to add guys where there's the least amount of factors that might impact their ability to be successful. And so I would take Jones in the 4th round, but I definitely wouldn't take him with my other second-round pick.
Do you think he lasts that long? Because I think that we've seen in the past where first-round picks wind up being second- or third-round picks due to an injury. The Achilles one is definitely a tough pill to swallow for the cornerback position, but do you think that he will slide all the way to round 4? I think he goes before the 4th, but I can see why he might fall that far.
Yeah, the problem is the cornerback class is so deep this year. So if in other years, if you're a team that needed a cornerback, Sidney Jones is more appealing, even though he's injured, because the fall off, from the top whatever guys to the second tier is a lot deeper. But this year, you're looking like, we talked about him. Quincy Wilson could be available, in the 2nd round. Cordrea Tankersley out of Clemson, I like a lot of. Dory Jackson. There's a lot of guys where you're looking at 7, 8, 9 cornerbacks that are going to go before Sidney Jones. So, I think he'll be available late 2nd, probably definitely, I would say very good chance in the 3rd. I don't think he makes it to the 4th, but I agree. I don't think the Eagles would be, in my opinion, foolish to consider him at 43.
Elliot, it's about that time when the Eagles go on the clock next Thursday night, pick number 14. Roger Goodell steps to the podium. He gets booed because this is Philadelphia after all. But finish this sentence. With the 14th overall pick in the NFL draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
I've been giving him Kevin King for my past few mock drafts. I still think he's their guy. Again, is he a reach? Maybe, but he's been invited to the first round. He's viewed as a first round prospect by the NFL. I know he's not a name people knew a lot, but again, I've talked about his resume on here, and I'm not saying I would take him at 14. I'm saying this is what I think the Eagles are going to do. He checks off a lot of their boxes. I'll do it again. 6'3". They like their corners tall, long arms. He has it. If you throw it his direction, you really got it. His long arms allow him to make up for poor coverage at the beginning of the route. Fast. He won 4 out of the 6, I think, drills at the combine among the cornerbacks. Versatile. He played safety for 2 years at Washington, has played in the slot. He can play all 5 secondary spots. Good in man coverage, something we know they like out of their guys. So, I think you could probably get Kevin King at like 23, 24. But if you're the Eagles and you don't have a good offer to trade back, I think you just take your guy there. The need is at cornerback, even though they could go other ways. But I think even though Kevin King isn't very high on maybe like our boards or other scouts or big boards you read online, I think he's higher on their board than we think. So to me right now, I think that'll be the pick.
I'll go same position, different player. I'll go Gary Conley. I think that this might be a little bit of a smokescreen that he's rising up these boards as quick as he is. I think that the thirst for quarterbacks in the NFL is real, which is why Mitch Trubisky and Deshaun Watson and Kaiser, that these guys are going to go much higher than we might have thought a couple of weeks ago. And that's going to cause some players to slide. And I think that some team is going to take the risk on the Reuben Foster shoulder injury, and that's going to push an impact player like Connolly down to the Eagles' range. Perfect fit, 6 foot, 195, long arms, good in press coverage, good in zone coverage, great numbers. 49 tackles, 1 tackle for loss last year, 2 picks, 5 pass breakups, can step in, start right away opposite of Jalen Mills. I agree with you, it's corner. I think it's a different player. I think it's Connolly, but regardless, I think that next Thursday is going to be a lot of fun.
Yep, I agree. And, only 9 days, like you said. So, it's not just a first round with this team. Obviously, Thursday will be fun, but they really need to this is a big draft for Howie. So, all the rounds are going to be interesting. But, yeah, absolutely, first round, 9 days away. It's crazy. It's almost here.
Should be a lot of fun. He's Elliot Shore-Parks. Read him every day at NJ.com/Eagles. Follow him on Twitter at Elliot Shore-Parks. Once again, this is episode 65 of the No Huddle Show. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play. I'm Matt Lombardo. This was a lot of fun, Elliot. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Lombardo PHL. And be sure to follow the No Huddle Show at the No Huddle Show. For Elliot Shore-Parks, I'm Matt Lombardo. We'll talk to you next week, getting you ready with a comprehensive NFL draft preview show. Thanks for listening to the No Huddle Show.